Welcome back to Analysis, where we've been discussing the controversies surrounding Quilliam Foundation Chairman Majid Nawaz's tweeting of a cartoon depicting the Prophet Muhammad. Rejoining me from the first half of the show are Mohammed Ansar, a political commentator, Mohammed Amin, Vice Chair of the Conservative Muslim Forum, Amina Blake, Vice Chair of the Muslim Association of Britain, and the Reverend George Pitcher, a former public affairs advisor to the Archbishop of Canterbury. And also now, joining us by Skype, are Todd Green, an assistant professor of European and American religious history at Luther College. And by phone, we have Julian Bond from the Christian Muslim Forum. Well, Todd Green, let me start with you, if I may. How much does this compare, do you think, to the Danish cartoon controversy of a few years ago? Is it as serious as that?
I don't think it's as serious as that at all. I certainly don't think the particular cartoon that was tweeted by Mr. Nawaz ranks with some of the particular caricatures that were published by the Danish newspaper back in 2005 and 2006. And we certainly don't seem to be involved in any great geopolitical conflict right now, as was the case, of course, for the Danish cartoon controversy. So far, much of this has remained a local debate. And as I was communicating with one of your producers yesterday, even in the United States, that the media has not really picked up much on this story, compared, of course, to the long-term coverage of the Danish cartoon controversy.
Well, maybe that's because there's not any violence involved in it at all. There was in the Danish case. Is that one of the factors, do you think?
It might be. I certainly think the way that this is being handled in terms of the political debate in Britain is also a bit different than what was taking place in Denmark. And the nature of the cartoons that were published, two or three of them in particular, were very provocative, offensive, and the very campaign, if you will, by the editors of the Jyllands-Posten newspaper had a very different flavor to it, as opposed to Mr. Nawaz's tweet, which didn't seem to be particularly orchestrated, at least not in the way I've been following this story. It certainly wasn't trying to generate a major debate over freedom of expression in quite the same way that the Danish cartoon controversy was. And so that's one of the reasons perhaps it has remained a British affair so far, as I can tell.
Well, thank you. Julian Bond, let me turn to you. I mean, do you think that this has implications beyond the Muslim community, or is this just a local sort of in-house argument?
I think it has a number of implications, but the key implication is how we handle issues in the public sphere and what kind of response we choose to make to them. And the key thing about this is that it wasn't so much about the cartoon which Majid Nawaz tweeted, but the earlier issue around the students wearing the T-shirts at LSE. And that particular strip and that website have been around for a while.
Well, can you just remind viewers what was the thing at the LSE and the T-shirts? What was the relevance of that?
There were a couple of students, I think from an atheist or humanist society, who were wearing the Jesus and Mo T-shirts at Freshers Week. And they were excluded from Freshers Week because they were wearing the T-shirts. And the original reason given was that it would be offensive to people of faith, Christians and Muslims, and that it wasn't appropriate, or that there had been some kind of breach of respect and so on. There was a review afterwards, and it was decided that the decision to exclude them was incorrect, and that they actually had a public right to wear those T-shirts. And it was that question about the T-shirts, I understand, which was being discussed on the Big Questions on the BBC, and Majid and others were asked to comment on this.
Well, George Pitcher, let me come back to you. I mean, how do you find the Jesus and Mo cartoons, and do you think there was a free speech issue in this T-shirt issue?
Well, at a theological level, it doesn't touch me at all. I mean, I have to say I haven't seen one of the T-shirts. I think my big test would not be anything to do with my faith, but whether it was funny or not. I take much greater exception to people wearing T-shirts that aren't funny than whether they're offensive or not. and this plays to the whole, is God big enough to take this or not? You know, this plays back to the whole, should we really get too worked up about this? I mean, I don't mean to undermine the whole purpose of your programme tonight, but the seriousness with which, the earnestness with which this is being discussed is the only thing that I find mildly offensive. And do you know, it's the whole, the inexperience, the political inexperience of the Liberal Democrats in this is to the fore again. We just saw it through the whole Lord Renard business. But they're so politically babyish. This long, earnest letter that's written by Nick Clegg about explaining the position with regard to whether we are in a free speech society that should be in a position of allowing students to put stupid things on T-shirts or not, is a waste of political breath. And do you notice that at the end, Nick Clegg goes, by the way, I take the Muslim community in Britain terribly seriously, and I was against the war in Iraq. I mean, oh, really? do you really want to bring Iraq into a T-shirt cartoon debate, Nick? I mean, that's why he'll get decimated and the Lib Dems will get decimated, because they're just not big boys in politics and they don't treat it with the contempt that it deserves.
Well, we don't want to talk about the Liberal Democrats entirely on this programme.
Well, I do.
No, I know you do.
Well, I just did. But can we stop talking about them, actually? Because the whole country will stop talking about them next year.
I mean, it is a follow-on, but it's to try and bring it into the sort of kind of mainstream thing, which is, do you think that Liberal Democrats are, a credible party when it comes to Muslim issues and minority issues of ethnic communities, etc.?
I tweeted out some pictures. It's at Mo Ansar, by the way. But I tweeted out some pictures from the Conservative conference over the last couple of years, and I was staggered at the lack of diversity in the room. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Nadeem Zahawi, recently about some of the challenges that the Tory party has in reaching out to younger, ethnic minority and more diverse communities. And this is a challenge that is reflected across all parties. OK, Labour have something like 5 or 6 times more ethnic minority representation. But the idea that we are getting into second, third, and whatever generation Muslims in this country. We've been here for quite some time now. I'm sure Amina can talk better than me on these issues. But my wife is a revert, as we say, to Islam, as is my mother. I'm a brother-in-law of Lutheran Christians. We're very well integrated into British society, and we contribute a great deal. And the fact that the Liberal Democrats have no notable Muslim representation at a time when the Muslim community have a far younger age profile than our Anglican brothers and sisters, who the average age is around 50, and the average age for the Muslim community is around 26.
Although Nick Clegg is an atheist.
Well, he may well be. He may well be. I mean, it's.
But he's not a studied atheist. He's a sort of I don't think I can be bothered to pay attention atheist.
But I wouldn't like to bring Nick Clegg's personal reputation into it. But the party clearly has a problem.
Well, he's a public figure.
Well, I think the party has a problem because if it sees itself as having liberal values and it takes a Muslim candidate, I understand he's a Muslim. I mean, there's some questions around that, but he professes to be a Muslim, and the kind of baggage that he comes with is decidedly illiberal. And his views and his attitude towards people is decidedly illiberal. And actually what we're now beginning to realise is that there are questions around his general impropriety and his ability to stand as an MP and represent people. Anybody who says that they are the gatekeeper and hold the keys to the definition of what is an acceptable Muslim and an unacceptable Muslim, I think the British public will have a great deal of anxiety about anybody like that who says, I have an idea and can apply the one true Scotsman test. And I think this is reflected across all of the British communities. That's just not how we do things in this country.
Well, Julian Bond, I mean, where do you stand? Do you think that the issue of representation of Muslims is sufficient in British politics at the moment?
There's a big question there, and there are Labour and Conservative Muslim politicians. I think the challenge for Muslims is to engage with the values of the Liberal Democrat Party, because I think there are some challenges there in terms of where the fit is between the Liberal Democrats and the Muslim community. And there are fewer Muslims who are interested in Liberal Democrat politics, I believe. I think that Imam Ajmal Masroor was standing as a Lib Dem candidate a few years ago, and it would be great to see more Muslims relating to the Liberal Democrat Party and any other parties, because religion and people are diverse and people find different values and different affiliations, and we're very pleased in the Christian Muslim Forum to work with a diverse range of Muslims in all different positions, different traditions.
Well, Todd Green, looking at it from a bit more of a distance, I mean, in Britain, isn't it the case, that compared to the United States, for example, that in politics in Britain, religion is kept pretty much out of it? It's not a relevant issue that most people ask whether their candidate is religious, or if they are religious, which religion it is. Whereas in American politics, the whole thing is much more acute, isn't it, and more relevant?
Yes, particularly for major political offices, congressional representatives, the presidency, you wear your religion on your sleeve almost. And assuming that it's, quote unquote, the correct religion, to have a Muslim identity is still a bit of a challenge, I think, for political candidates at the national level in the United States, or to have an identity that's not Christian. In Britain, as in much of Western Europe, religion has been more and more relegated to the private sphere. Be religious, that's fine, just sort of keep it at home, but don't sort of insert it too much into the public sphere, which is why I think there has been growing tensions over the recent decades throughout Europe in terms of the place of Islam in Europe, the place of Muslim minority communities, the debates over what it means to be British, what it means to be Swedish or Dutch or whatever, and can you reconcile that identity with a Muslim identity? That has become a very politicized issue in Europe, in part because so many Europeans had sort of felt and thought that they had solved the issue of religion. It's private. And now we have a growing community of people who really have a different understanding of religious identity. And I think that's one of the reasons it is so politicized.
Well, Mohammed, I mean, you're a conservative and you're a Muslim. I mean, is it actually relevant in British politics, whether you're religious or not? Do you think it's important?
It shouldn't be relevant at all. I mean, first of all, I just want to add to something that Mo Ansar said about the Conservative Party conference. I've been to the Conservative Party conference every year since 2008. And with every year that goes by, there is a higher percentage of ethnic minorities present at the conference. I would undoubtedly like there to be more, but nevertheless, the trend is very clear and very positive in terms of growing diversity. And in 2010, for the first time, the Conservatives had 2 Muslim MPs. One of them is a rising star, Sajid Javid, who's Economic Secretary to the Treasury, which is a key role in government. Now, coming back to what you said earlier about religion and politics, my views on this are very clear and very simple. Nobody can be expected to leave their religious beliefs outside the door of Parliament. They're an integral part of your identity and what you believe. You believe them outside Parliament, you believe them when you go into the parliamentary chamber. However, in that chamber, you first of all are responsible for representing all of your constituents regardless of their religious beliefs. So if you're a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew in Parliament, you represent everybody in your constituency. Secondly, when you want to argue for any particular policy, the only arguments that are legitimate to put forward are arguments based upon evidence, facts, and reason. It is completely illegitimate to say, we must follow through policy X because my holy book says we need to follow policy X, regardless of whether your holy book is the Quran, the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, or anything else.
But what happens if you think the policy goes against what's in your holy book? Then how do you decide it?
You need to debate these policies on entirely rational grounds. If somebody else is proposing a policy which is against your holy book, it's not enough to say my holy book disagrees with this policy. You have to find clear, logical, rational, evidence-based arguments against that policy.
Well, Amina Blake, where do you stand? I mean, if a candidate is religious, do you feel more supportive of that person than if they're not religious? Or and particularly if they're Muslim, do you feel much more supportive?
No, not at all. I think that any candidate that I would potentially support needs to be upholding the British values, first of all, and to be somebody that I can trust, and somebody who communicates with me, and somebody who is wise. I very much agree with Amin when he says that that candidates need to be representative of their communities. But then, of course, that again brings into the question the validity of having somebody who clearly doesn't have that wisdom to represent their community. If they can't represent their own community, then how can they be expected to represent other communities in a pragmatic way as well?
George Pitcher, I mean, you worked for Rowan Williams, who some might say was one of the most political of Archbishops of Canterbury that there have been in recent generations. I mean, where do you see the role of religion and politics, I mean, for candidates? Should they have a religion?
Well,
ideally?
first of all, I think that role of one of the most religious Archbishop of Canterbury was thrust upon Rowan Williams rather than him seeking that out. But there's no doubt that religion and politics aren't something that can be miraculously separated in some sort of chemical dish. I mean, that is completely nonsense. To engage with politics is absolutely true. But I'm interested to hear Amina and Amin talk about representation of the Muslim community, because I think some of the parties, I'm not one of life's natural conservatives, as you may have spotted, but I do think the Conservative Party is getting better at recognising that it's not just about knee-jerk representation. Oh my goodness, there's lots of Muslims living in this Midland city, so it would be quite cool, wouldn't it, to have an MP for them to represent them where there's lots of them. You know, there's Nusrat Ghani, for instance, is just been elected as prospective parliamentary candidate for Wealdon, which is near where I live in Sussex. Now, Sussex, rural Sussex, I can reveal on your programme, is not one of those places that extreme right bloggers from the Telegraph are always identifying as being overrun with Muslims. Now, Nusrat is a woman, which is amazing enough in Sussex as a Conservative parliamentary candidate, but not only is she a woman, she's an Asian and a Muslim. And I think that we're only truly free and representative in politics when we can start to say, not that a Muslim has to be representative in Parliament of the Muslim community, but that this person is a British citizen and can represent all these white-faced, rural, tweed-wearing English people in Sussex too, irrespective of whether she's a woman or an Asian or a Muslim. And I think that's real progress that it hurts my throat to say so, that the Conservatives are making, but the Liberal Democrats are nowhere near that if they're still having silly little arguments about whether somebody's been naughty about tweeting something about a T-shirt. Well, I mean, they're so far behind the curve politically. They're even behind the Conservatives.
Well, let's hear from Hamid.
Just another fact to that. Even in 2010, Sajid Javid's constituency is Bromsgrove, which had a previous 10,000 majority. It's a very white constituency. They selected Sajid Javid not because he's a Muslim, but because he's a bright guy with a great career in banking.
But I think you'll have to recognise, now we'll all have to recognise that just as anybody should be free to be representing their local constituency, regardless of race, sexuality, be it religion or any other of those kind of diverse strands, at the same time, it shouldn't protect you. And just because you're a Muslim, if you're unsuitable, or if you're a Buddhist or an Anglican or a Hindu and you're unsuitable, then you're unsuitable. And I think we are having a vastly different debate around this, because of the fact that the prospective parliamentary candidate is a Muslim, and this is being whipped up into quite a hysterical debate in some areas. And I was massively reassured to see that both Majid Nawaz and Mohammed Shafiq issued a joint statement which is asking people to just moderate their tone, just calm down a little bit. If we want to have a sensible dialogue, and I think that's what everyone is asking for, where we take out some of the worst vitriol and that kind of, it's almost like a primal scream of an argument that's happening, where people have got these bottled up anxieties and tensions, and they are going after characters and individuals, and it's becoming an awfully ugly and smearing argument. That doesn't need to be the case. I understand none of the underlying issues are changed, and I'm not exactly sure it's going to be enough to save Mr. Nawaz from being deselected. But I think it's important to be able to have a moderate and a sensible dialogue about some of these issues.
Well, Todd Green, I mean, we're coming to the end. I mean, looking at it from across the Atlantic, I mean, do you think that the issue is going to simmer down now in Britain on this point, this tweet, this argument?
There's no evidence I see right now that this will blow up into something that will come anywhere close to the Danish cartoon crisis, or certainly not the so-called Rushdie affair from 25 years ago. I actually see, in many ways, in the political response to this event as a great evolution in the British political and religious landscape in terms of the way it's being handled. Not that you don't have some unfortunate responses to Mr. Nawaz in terms of the threats, but by and large, I think the responses have been very sound, certainly debatable tactics, but these are all tactics that fit within a democracy. I do see one continuing problem with the way the story is being covered in the media that reflects the way Islam generally is covered by Western media, is that it's been sort of narrowly reduced to a freedom of speech issue in this old narrative of Muslims and their inability to embrace freedom of expression. Sort of has been brought up a good bit in the British media as sort of a simplified narrative. And I think there's a little bit more complexity here. And particularly the petition against Mr. Nawaz, you can debate the political wisdom of that or whether this is a good tactic, but I don't think it undermines freedom of expression. And I would like to see a little bit more complexity and a little more nuance to this story than I've seen in some of the media reports.
That's a very good note on which to end, because I think we've been trying to provide complexity and nuance in this debate tonight. Thank you very much for taking part, Todd Green and Julian Bond, Mohammed Amin, Amina Blake, Mohammed Ansar and George Pitcher. And of course, thank you all for watching Analysis.